Lovely Sunday morning. Great. My name, as mentioned, is Natasha Kimani. I am from Kenya, the most beautiful city on the continent, and I work at an organization known as Africa No Filter. Today, I get the honor and privilege to moderate a panel with two fantastic women. I'll begin to my further right with Yvvette Edwards from the United Kingdom.
Hello.
Hello. Can we just say a nice hello and welcome her properly?
Hello.
Yvvette is a British East Londoner and an author of two novels, A Cupboard Full of Coats, 2011, and my personal favorite, The Mother, 2016. She has written a number of short stories which have been broadcast on radio and published in anthologies, including New Daughters of Africa. Her work has been nominated for literary awards, including the Commonwealth Winners' Prize and the Man Booker Prize. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. A round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Makena Onjerika is a 2018 winner of the Caine Prize for African Writing. She is also the founder of the Nairobi Writing Academy. She's an author, editor, and publisher. Welcome, Makena. How many of you have read New Daughters of Africa? A show of hands. Okay, challenge after this, I would love for you to read it. Do I get a promise that you're going to read it? So thank you very much. I'm going to just dive right in, and I'll begin with you, Yvvette. What inspired your book, Security? Because I personally, as I read it, I went through so many emotions: anger, frustration. There's so many layers to the story. Before we even get to why you wrote the story, what inspired you to be part of the numerous women, 200 writers, to write for the New Daughters of Africa?
When I received the invitation to put something together for New Daughters of Africa, I got an email from Margaret Busby, and she's like a living legend. I mean, my eyes nearly popped out of my head, and she asked if I wanted to contribute to this new Daughters of Africa, and yeah, it's just one of those proposals that you cannot say no to. But I was aware of the original Daughters of Africa, and I knew that it had been like a really big thing, and it's a really big book. They're both like quite big tomes of anthologies, and what I most admired, I think, about, well, one of the things that I admire, there's so much to admire about both books, but one of the things that I really liked was the reach of it, that it was international, that the contributions that were in the original Daughters of Africa were being read all over the world and being widely reviewed, like in countries in Africa, in the Caribbean, in America, the UK, where Margaret's based. And so it kind of felt a little bit like going into the history books, like having a piece in there, because I think that those are going to be they're going to be books that people will refer to forever. I think that people will always be going back and looking at the contributions, the contributors, the stories in there, and it will stand the test of time. Whenever it's picked up in, like, 100, 200 years, before anyone even opens it, they'll go, wow, this is a book. You can see this is a book even before you open it. So yeah.
Fantastic. Maybe you could just give us a brief snippet about Security. What inspired Security?
So there were two things that kind of happened. So that were happening around the time that I was asked to write that story. That I was asked to make a contribution. So one of them was political. So in the UK, this is a bit long, but so I'm just going to try and do it.
No.
Okay.
It's your time.
So in the UK. In the 40s, 50s and 60s. Basically, it was after the Second World War, and lots of British soldiers had been killed, and so they, in England, in the UK, they were having difficulty running, finding a workforce for essential services, so like running the NHS, running the post office service, running the National Health Service. So the UK went to the Caribbean, and they had a mass recruitment campaign trying to get people to come over to fulfill those like essential jobs. Those people, that group of Caribbeans, they were known as the Windrush generation. The people who came over, there was like the first boat that brought people over was called the HMS Windrush, so they were known as the Windrush generation. And the condition of them coming over and working would be that they would have automatic British citizenship. And so at that time in the Caribbean, there was not really much work. People who were in the Caribbean were having to leave their islands and go to different islands, different parts of the world to work and send money back home and all this stuff. So lots of people came over to England, and then they didn't receive any paperwork when they got to England. So they didn't receive anything to say, oh, you are now a British citizen. Some people, because they went back home or they went on holidays or whatever, so they may have applied for passports, and so they had like a British passport that showed that they had British citizenship. But people who didn't travel, so had no need of a passport. What happened to them was that in 2014, the government brought in a new piece of legislation around immigration, and they devolved the responsibility for checking who had the right to be in the UK, who had the right to access services, housing, benefits, pensions, medical treatment. They devolved the responsibility for checking that to a lot of people on the ground. So, for example, employers. So employers had to check people's immigration status before they gave them a job. Doctors, hospitals had to check people's immigration status before they gave them medical treatment. People who were receiving pensions, who had a change in their circumstances, would find that their pension wasn't renewed unless they could demonstrate that they were British citizens. And so there was a whole generation of like people who'd come over in the 50s and 60s and been here for their entire lives, had children. When I say here, sorry, I'm obviously like thinking I'm back in the UK. I don't know why, the weather's much better and it's much greener here. But there were people who were in England who had to prove that they were British were British citizens, but without any paperwork to show it. And for some reason, around that time, the Home Office destroyed all of their records relating to the Windrush generation. So the Home Office had no documentation to prove when people arrived or that they were entitled to British citizenship. And so literally the onus was put onto people to prove by production of a document, an official document for each year that they had been here since before 1973. And it was just, for a lot of people, it was really impossible. Their employers had closed down, even if you were registered with a doctor. The records weren't computerized back then, so they would have been destroyed. And so the government began deporting people who couldn't prove their immigration status, and it was absolutely terrible. Well, there was a guy who went to the hospital because he had cancer, and he could get cancer treatment, because he couldn't prove that he was a British citizen. People were evicted from their homes because they couldn't access like housing benefits, or were not able to get jobs but also couldn't claim benefits, and it was just an absolutely terrible time for the Windrush generation. So that was the kind of around the time that Margaret asked me, do I want to make a contribution to the New Daughters of Africa? That was the political backdrop in the UK. And then the other thing that happened around that time, which was personal, was that my mum, it was my mum's birthday, and we invited my mum up for her birthday and did a birthday dinner. And when she arrived, she was so upset, and she'd basically, on her way to us, she'd stopped in the pound shop to buy something, and she was absolutely fuming because from when she entered the shop, the security guard was following her around. She's like in her 70s, and she's like, she used to be a teacher here. She was a deputy head when she retired. She's like really kind of decently turned out. Not that makes it, any different, but she just could not believe that she'd been, but also she couldn't believe that she'd been followed around the pound shop by the security guard. But it was like it's happened to her so many times, and what I was thinking when afterwards, when I was thinking about the experience, I was thinking that because I think that you never get over those experiences. You never get to a place where it's happened to you so many times that you're okay with it. Do you know what I mean? It's like every single time it happens, you're aggrieved, and all of those old wounds from all the times that it's happened to you previously are reopened. And she was devastated. And so she was devastated on two levels. She makes me laugh. So one, because the security guard had followed her around, but two, because he had followed her around the pound shop. Everything in the pound shop costs £1. And she was saying, what does he think? How dare he? If I was going to be a criminal mastermind, I go and like shoplift in Harrods or Fortnum and Masons, or who would shoplift in the pound shop? How dare he follow me around the pound shop? And so that happened. And then I was thinking about that experience of my mum's, and I was thinking about the kind of political backdrop and the general treatment of, because my mum's part of that Windrush generation, my granddad was part of that Windrush generation. I was thinking about those two things kind of came together in the same space, and so then I had the idea for I knew that I wanted to write about both of those, that these two things were interlinked, and that I wanted to do a story kind of around that. And then a lot of the stuff that in my work, in all of my work, kind of comes from like personal experiences. When I was thinking about my mum's experience of being followed around, I remembered, which I hadn't remembered up until then, like an experience of us when we were younger, being followed around a store with my mum, me and my brother, when we were little, and my mum saying, we're gonna reverse the tables here, and so we'd kind of gone down an aisle, and then when we got around the corner, and we had to run up the aisle and then back around the corner. So we were behind the security guard, and we thought it was hilarious. I'd actually forgotten that experience, and then when I was thinking about my mum's experience and I was thinking about that story, I remembered that experience from when we were very young, and so all of that kind of came together to create the story Security that's in the anthology.
I mean, thank you for that explanation. I have many follow-up questions, but I'm first going to come to Makena.
Yeah, sure.
Because one of the things that stood out to me was that my American friend often says this, that you can't good black yourself out of racism. You cannot try to be the best black person in the room to avoid racism. It's going to fund you one way or another if you're a black person. So I'd love to come to that later on. But Makena, the man watching our house, it haunted me. I have so many questions. I was like, okay, is he a ghost? Or did the relatives have bipolar? I have so many questions in my head. But first, what made you want to be part of this beautiful anthology of stories?
Actually, my story is less I guess. Uh, well, I'll just explain.
Yes.
So I sat next to Margaret Busby
Yeah.
at the Caine Prize dinner, and we had a conversation. I think I was one of the last people to actually submit for the anthology.
Yeah.
It was just, we had a conversation and then it happened. I
Yeah.
didn't know anything
Yeah.
about the previous anthology.
Okay.
I didn't know who was going to be in this anthology.
Yeah.
So it was more like I had just won the Caine Prize.
And congratulations.
Thank you. So what was interesting about it was that my Caine Prize story was actually my third published story and my third complete story. And so she writes and she's like, hey, do you have a story that you want to submit? And I was like, oh no, I don't have any other stories. So I just found the second complete story and sent it to her. It wasn't, like a deeply well thought submission that I was making specifically for that anthology.
So chance happened.
Yeah.
So what inspired this particular story? I'm really curious. Is it from personal experience?
Yes.
Okay. Please tell us a bit more about it.
Yes. So I think I'd written the story. I must have written it in maybe 2010 or 2011. So that was a whole 8 years before.
Yeah.
No, actually, I definitely wrote it earlier than that. I wrote it during my undergraduate class. I had a class at Amherst College where we did a lot of reading of books around childhood in Africa. And one of the books we read there was Ake by Wole Soyinka. So anyway, during that class, we had to produce pieces of work that were reminiscent of the work that we had read. And somehow this came out of that class. And over the years, I just improved upon it. The main story there about the mother in the story, the day after burying her own mother, having this guy walking across their land, is a story that my mom actually told me. So it's part of the story is very autobiographical, by the way. So it's just a story that she told me, and then I've always felt a bit haunted by ghosts, maybe.
Okay.
So when I was in primary school, I was in a boarding school, and one day I woke up. I was very religious at the time, so I woke up for my prayers around 5 a.m. and I believe that I actually saw a ghost of a little girl. So this kind of, and also, I don't know, throughout my childhood, there are all these stories like, you'll be traveling late at night and you'll pick up someone and then they'll end up being a genie with the hooves. You'll be told those stories are very much a part of life here. So I think you'll find that they permeate my work anyway. I do believe in a way that we are not alone.
Yes.
And they're here and sometimes they show up and bother us, or sometimes they leave us, but it's just a part of that. So my story also was a reflection on my departure from the church.
Yes.
Which happened when I went to the US. And again, another story my mother told me after that. So the story about...
that was also true?
Yeah, the story, yes, the man mentioning my name in the village, that was also part of it. So I would say, the story is really me trying to put together all these sort of ghost stories that have been part of my life for quite a while also reflecting on this, what happens in your family or to your family when you leave the church. Yeah.
And the story, from what I understood, was haunted and was also feeling a bit guilty for leaving the church.
Yes, absolutely.
And there was some sense of punishment.
Yes.
And withdrawal from her family.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that theme resonated, even with her uncle being accused of witchcraft. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that as you write, because you mentioned that this is a common theme in a lot of your stories, ghosts and exploring that conversation. How haunting was it even for you as an individual to walk away from the church, and how has that affected your writing?
I mean, by the time I left the church, I was very extremely devout, because I was part of what is called the apostolic movement, which is a level up from just the Pentecostal movement, right? And previous to that, I had been Catholic, so I had really gone through all the very various phases of contemporary Christian faith that you could go through. So for years after I left the church, I had nightmares in which terrible things were happening. And, within the faith, one of the ways of preventing or countering like a demonic attack, for example, is the name of Christ. So this would happen to me in dreams for 10 years after and stuff like that. So there's definitely a feeling of being haunted, a feeling of the fact that you can expect punishment. Anyway, it's something that is constantly going to be said to you, you are going to go to hell. Yeah. Or, you are not under the protection of the blood of Jesus Christ and all these things. So I think that for a long time it was a mental weight on me. And I did want to reflect upon it in my story. So I do enjoy being a person who has been on both sides of that, because I think it makes me able to write characters and be empathetic towards, if they are of the faith and they're religious. But at the same time, I can be also on this side and write from that side.
Okay. And curiously, when it comes to some of the people who've inspired your writing along the years, both men and women, but first, because this is New Daughters of Africa, I'll focus on the women, and particularly African women. Maybe you could tell us a few of the names who have inspired your work and why, and if any book stands out that you'd want to to get a deep dive into Makena that inspired you. I'd love to hear a bit about that.
So of course, the first is Chimamanda Adichie, because of her purple hibiscus. So I think for me, in terms of reading, I have waves with different people. So there's a time where I'm just obsessed with a particular writer and I'm reading everything of theirs. But the book that really stands out for me was Purple Hibiscus, because it gave me license to write. And also it's a book about religion. Then you have people like Helen Oyemi, Icarus Girl. It is also a book about that clash between our African faith beliefs and Christianity. So Icarus Girl is quite interesting in the sense that you have a very religious grandfather who at the end of the book realizes that this particular set of beliefs is not going to be enough to overcome the curse, I guess, for what's happening to his granddaughter, who is basically having a twin steal her soul or something. So stories like that, of course, always fascinate me. Zadie Smith was also like a big influence for me, because I actually sat with her in class at NYU, and there was a period where everything I read was just Zadie Smith, Zadie Smith, Zadie Smith. I mean, she is very, let's say, brave. She takes on writing styles that I am yet to even attempt. She's writing really big. And then you have like Jamaica Kincaid. And Jamaica Kincaid resonated with me a lot. Because she writes about, I don't think she writes anymore, Jamaica Kincaid?
No, I don't think she's
Yeah, she's not writing anymore. But a lot of her books were about female anger. So her characters tend to be very unruly women, and that's something that I've, at least now, that I'm exploring a lot in my writing. And also, she has a whole book called Mr. Potter, which is about her father who abandoned her at some point. That resonated with me because I was raised by a single mom. My dad woke up one day and he just walked away. So I think that, what I would say is that I tend to seek writers who are sort of in the same space as myself, whether they're male or female, because then sometimes I don't pick up books. I'm not known to be very contemporary in my reading, but because really what I'm looking for is a writer who resonates with me, and it can be right across genres. So my other big influence is N.K. Jemisin, and she writes literary fantasy, and I mean she's really good. And then you have Nadi Okorafor, who I go to for ideas, but I also find myself writing against Nadi because I am obsessed, I think, with craft. And so sometimes there's things she does in her writing that I'm just like, oh my God, you had such a good idea and then you didn't like the execution and stuff like that. So she's someone I go to sort of to explore all the, she has such a beautiful, wild imagination, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, Nadi, man, it's like it's a push and pull with her in particular. So yeah, lots of different kinds of writers, but from just a broad spectrum.
Thank you. I'm going to come back and explore your academy and the writing behind that, but I'd love to come to you, Yvvette, and explore a bit more about not just racism, because Makena mentioned anger. And as I was reading this story, I could feel the woman's anger. It was palpable. She'd spent her whole life in England trying to be the best woman she could be, and it all led to nothing. At some point I cried when I was reading that story. And she lost her son, she lost, and this must be the common story for a lot of the Windrush.
Yeah, it's a very very common story. I think that like in the context of home, like the people in the Windrush generation, lots of them couldn't remain in their homes because they couldn't support themselves, they couldn't support their family, there wasn't work, and so then they were forced to leave their homes and to go to other places to create new homes, and for the majority of them, the plan was that they would go for a couple of years. My aunts and uncles, my granddad, this is all they talked about all the time. They're going to work for a couple of years, save up enough money to build a house back home, and they were going to return back home. And lots of them left the children behind because when they were coming to England, they didn't have any accommodation, so they needed to come over, sort out some accommodation, get a job, and then save up out of what they were working for while paying back the money that they'd loaned for their tickets to come in the first place, save up for the tickets for the kids to come. And some of those stories ended really tragically. Some people were able to kind of get into a situation where they were able to send for their children over a year or two. That would have been early. And lots of children remained away, separate from their families for quite long periods of time, 7, 8 years. And then there were some people who just never managed to send for their children. It was, my granddad used to talk about, he used to have quite the sense of humour, my granddad, and he used to say that when he came over as part of the Windrush generation, that everyone was really happy for him because there was this belief, this literal belief that the streets of England were paved with gold. And he said that when he was on the boat on the way over, that there were groups of men who were talking about making sure that they had enough room in their pockets when they came off, because you just want to pick up pick up, as much gold as you could on the, as soon as you starting from as soon as you got off the bus. And then there was like this joke about this guy who, when he came off the boat, there was like a shilling or something on the floor, and somebody said, "Hey, you're not going to pick that up?" And he was like, "No, I'm going to wait for the bigger coins. I'm just going to pick up the bigger coins." And so there was this idea that, like, when they came over here, that they would be able to make money, and they would be able to save, and they would be able to send for their children. And the reality was quite different. It was really, really hard. It was a really exploitative environment that they came into, where landlords were renting out like single rooms to sometimes I've heard stories of like 8-10 people sharing like one room, unrelated to each other, so like virtual strangers. Stories of people like sharing a room, some of whom were working in the daytime, some of whom were working in the night, so that there was like a constant there were constantly people sleeping in the bed, topping and tailing in the bed in the daytime and in the nighttime. And yet the rents were really, really high, and it was difficult for them to move out and to afford to get bigger properties, or even just a room for themselves and their family. They just kind of got the reality didn't live up to the hope, I think. And but then they, like I have, again, drawing from life experience, true life experience for my story. Like I have aunties and staff who worked in old people's homes for their whole life while they were here, and genuinely they do have back problems from lifting people in and out of bed and all this stuff for just decades, and they dealt with a lot of racism from like the people that they were actually caring for, but I think that they were just like fundamentally decent people, predominantly Christians, and they just I wouldn't say that it didn't hurt them, because it did. They talked about it. They never forgot those experiences. But it's like they kind of just kept forgiving people, and still stepped up. Like, when people didn't have visitors and, were like maybe dying, and, were especially kind to them, even though those people had been really awful to them and really quite racist. And I just wanted to kind of like, explore all of that, really.
Thank you. I'm going to come back and explore further questions about home to the both of you, but I'd also like to give our audience an opportunity to ask a question or two to our wonderful authors. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We would love to hear from you. Please tell us your name, where you're from, and short and sweet. Thanks. Just as an FYI, Kenyans often have this thing where they just want to give a comment. I hope you sound like it was going to be a comment. Okay, please. Questions, anybody? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Chepchirchir. I'm from Eldoret, Kenya. And my question was actually for Yvvette Edwards. Thank you for sharing your story, and also Makena. Thank you. When you're talking about the Windrush generation, right, and just the unraveling of the British Empire and the consequences of that, about questions of citizenship, home, belonging, nationality, ethnicity, all these categories that become complicated. I was just wondering in the UK what the conversation looks like across different, let's say, ethnic groups that also experience that, because I'm particularly thinking about the South Asian diaspora that kind of also had a similar displacement after, the unraveling of empire, and yet you have people who have held positions of power who have made questionable decisions when you assume the assumption is they would perhaps relate to this kind of history. So I was just curious if you have any works you could suggest that explore that, like, inter, and like, if you just comments about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's not something that I've written about, but I mean the term hostile environment has been coined for the kind of political position in the UK around immigration, and there's a kind of active hostility towards newcomers, and the removal of rights that people have had for as long as the European Court of Human Rights has been around. The rights to make applications for asylum if they're in danger in their homelands, and we're in the process of ignoring those rights that people have, and setting new conditions of entry that are almost unachievable for most people. So that kind of the hostile environment is not limited to the Windrush generation, and in fact I had a close friend who she'd come over from India when she was in her 20s, and her husband was a British citizen, and so she came over as his spouse, and then had a spousal visa which was stuck in his passport, and then he died about 10 years after she came over, and they had children, and then she basically in 2014 she was working on a self-employed basis, and then she just couldn't get paid for the work that she'd done, and people kept asking her, but do you have more stuff that you can provide regarding your immigration status, and all she had was that spousal visa that was in her husband's passport from 1972 or something like that. So because the passport wasn't valid, the visa also was considered to be not valid, even though she'd always worked. When her husband died, she was the main provider. She'd always worked full time, and there was no issue. And her pension was stopped. So not only could she not work, but her pension was stopped, and it was such a terrible time for her. And she managed to sort it out, but it cost her about £3,000 for all the legal expenses and the visa expenses and everything. And she never really got over it. It was just it was awful. So that's my comment on that. Yeah.
Any other questions from our audience? Great. I'm going to come back now to you, Makena. But before I do, this is a question to you both. Our theme for this festival is home. And from both your stories, I get a sense that, for example, for you, Makena, though she was home, but she didn't feel at home in her home and with her people. And on the other hand, Yvvette, your story, she'd left Jamaica when, I think 57 years.
She'd left Montserrat
so
when she was quite young.
She's known England for most of her life, and yet she's never felt at home, and here she's being deported, going to a home that's not been home, and isn't home because her son isn't home. So there are many different elements of home, and maybe we could explore that a little, beginning with you, Makena. What home means, and when you're telling stories from that point of view, especially this story, I'd love to hear that from you.
In this particular story, I would say I'd never thought about it in the terms of home, but now that you mention it, it is a story about finding home, in the sense that the character in the story has to come to a place of accepting whatever consequences go with living what is acceptable to her family, and also the fact that the village, which is home, okay, at least in our context, is a source of a lot of anxiety for her. So there's several parts or ideas of home going on there. There's home in the spiritual sense, but there's also home in the struggle between the city and the village. And she also gets to leave the country and go somewhere else. So the story is sort of about her, and unfortunately it's not resolved in a positive manner. And maybe when the man comes for her, he will take her home, and it'll be all fine. I don't know, which is the good thing about being a writer. You don't have to know what happens after the story. After you end the story,
you leave your readers with chaos.
Yeah, you just stay with the chaos. Yeah, and so yes, in that sense, it is a story about home. I have, I think, found home for myself eventually. Like I know where I belong and everything. I'm not so sure about the character.
Okay, can we explore that a bit more? You say you know where you belong.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Okay, so for example, I think I have the opportunity to live outside of Kenya because I have been outside of Kenya before, but home is Kenya for me. I feel and I felt when I was in the UK, in the US, that I could not write my stories unless I was here on the ground. Okay, so I am grounded by Kenya and by events here. So, right now with what's happening in the country, there is a sense of, well, we are not quite sure, or I don't feel as sure as I used to be about the trajectory of the country. I grew up in the 90s under the Moi regime, and I was maybe 13 years old when he left and we had the changeover of power. And Mwai Kibaki came in, and there was so much, I don't know whether you guys remember that, but there was so much euphoria around the new Kenya and everything that was going. And so we've had this trajectory of 20 years that's been bumpy, but sort of, in our minds, I think it's been generally, we are not going back towards, like there was a dark ages, and it was the Moi age, the Moi era, and then we're never gonna go back to that. But now we are in a place that's kind of, we don't know how the economy will turn out and all that, and so, but still for me it feels like if I am not in this country, I cannot write. Like my stories are here. I've never, I lived in the US for about 6 years, and I've never been able to write a story about the US. It's one of the things I realized pretty early when I started getting serious about my writing. It's just that I have difficulty connecting with story elsewhere. This is where story makes sense to me. So that's what I mean by I have found home, and I've stopped having nightmares about my religion, so that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Yvvette, I'd really love for us to unpack what home means, especially because I lived in England. So I understand what it means to be othered at every single turn. And, I think one of the parts of the book, of the story that broke me is that historically when she was in the shop, she'd carry her trolley small basket on the left, not next to her bag. So it could be visible enough for the people to see that she wasn't stealing. And I think, I'd really like to explore, home. And, as we're living in very interesting times where home doesn't feel like home for a lot of Kenyans, and for a lot of Africans. And then when we think of going and moving abroad, when what we see, we're like, I mean, we're doomed if we do, we're doomed if we don't. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't really know. I found it quite interesting, actually, like during the course of this festival, kind of thinking about home, because I don't know, maybe I'm just slow, but I just haven't really kind of thought about it an awful lot. But now that I do, I think that like for when I was small, like so I was born in England. All my aunts, uncles, my mum, my granddad, they all came from Montserrat. And they specifically, when they said home, back home, they meant in Montserrat, and that was what they talked about like literally every single family gathering, and there were a lot of family gatherings in those days. I think that they were like a kind of response to being in a completely different country, and like they could actually relax and be themselves, like when they were like with people who looked like themselves. So there were loads of, it was just a round of like family things, and they spoke with so much nostalgia all the time about you know, back home when, you know, this happened and that happened, and all these interesting characters and people and situations, and being scared, you know, out of that's probably so in Montserrat, where the kind of talk about the jumbies and Jack Lantern and the ways that adults kind of use those stories to keep the kids in line. You'd never dare be out after dark on your own, because that was when Jack Lantern was wandering up and down looking for children, literally. And so I feel like I felt like that was also my home, that was like my sort of ancestral land, like where my family came from, where I came from, and yet I was born in England. I don't remember thinking about race. I lived in Hackney, which is like a really multicultural part of London. It's been gentrified now, and I can't afford to live there. But when I was growing up, it was Britain's poorest borough. So there was absolutely loads of poverty, lots of people from different places. It was very diverse. I remember very distinctly being at primary school when Alex Haley's Roots was serialised, and it was shown on the TV, and it was like an electric shock across like you know the black world, I think, in the UK, and a lot of kids my age who were at primary school, like who had I think never even imagined a history like that. It was absolutely shocking. And I still remember it like really vividly, and watching it with the family. I also feel like during my like growing up that I was just obsessed with I was obsessed. I wasn't obsessing, I wasn't thinking about it, but if you saw an advert that had a black person in it on the TV, that was your favorite advert. I can remember adverts from my youth, like there was one for Jamaican ginger cake, which was a thing, lilt with a totally tropical taste, that had the calypso playing in the background and the man like dancing to the calypso, and those adverts, they stick in my mind, because you just weren't seeing like black people like on the television, and so it was like I was like British. I never described myself as English, because there's a distinction between being English and being British, and English is like an indigenous state that applies if, like, you know, you can trace your family back in English. So I was never English, I was British, and it was just I don't know, the notion of home. I don't know what I thought it was. And then as an adult, I write in the UK. I go to lots of like literary festivals, literary events around the country. London's like really diverse, and so you know, you go, you meet all sorts of authors from all sorts of different places in London. often, like if I go to places outside of London for literary events that are not in big cities, I literally bring the diversity to the event. So when I arrive, the diversity has arrived, and literally, there might be an event and there might be like 20 authors there. I am the only author who absolutely everyone knows who I am. So there's no mistake. People come up to you and go, oh, you know that. Oh, it's so nice to meet you, and blah 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 blah. Because everyone knows who I am, because I'm like visible. And when I leave the event, I take the diversity with me. Do you know what I mean? So. And then I always think it's like really funny, like, because that sort of like happens. And the other thing that happens around those sorts of incidents is that I see like photographs of the event afterwards. I'm in every photograph, like literally every single photograph of the event. I'm in it, and I think, yeah, but I only took up this tiny portion of space, like in that event. How can I be like in every single photograph? And it's not, it's not oppressive, but it does feel kind of othering, I don't know. I don't know what home means. I don't know what home means to me, and I don't know. I don't fit in Montserrat, where I've never been, and where if you say something that people don't agree with, they accuse you of having snow on the brains. It's just I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that.
Perhaps there isn't an answer.
Yeah.
And yes, I'd love to hear from you, Makena.
As you were speaking, Yvvette, a couple of things were going on in my mind. First, that your experience of having another place identifiable as home, but that isn't really home, is something I've experienced as well. I came to Nairobi when I was 3 years old to join my mother and father, who had been here earlier, as university students, actually, at the University of Nairobi. So that removed me from Meru land, which is more towards the center of the country. And I used to speak Meru. I was fluent, but I was fluent in my father's dialect. Then my parents parted ways, and there was no one to speak that dialect to, so I lost the language. I still understand Meru. But because I grew up in Nairobi, Meru is this, place that I show up to and I spend a night in once a year. Yeah. My experience of that place is very different from the experience, let's say, my cousins who grew up there and then came to Nairobi have. And then now my mother lives a kilometer from me here. And so my son's, we call it upcountry. My son's upcountry is Nairobi. It's down the road. And so the distance for me from that place that should be home has just grown. And then also this idea of, as someone who comes from a space that was colonized and greatly disrupted, there is a way in which I don't have access to the stories. So some of the things I think about often is like, if you are English, if you're French, or even like Asian or American, and you came from a society where there was quite a lot of writing from a long time ago, you tend to have much more access to that history. And there's a way in which having history then tells you what to do and what not to do again. Yeah. And it also gives you a sense of pride in yourself. You can say things like, my ancestors. Well, my ancestors, But then if you're like me, who is divorced from the language and also divorced from sort of a written history that I can access, there's a way in which I have made home in Nairobi, but I still feel like a lack of certain sense of roots. And also, the UK is home in the sense that there's a lot of colonialism basically imported a lot of frameworks and patterns. Things I think about is when I went to the US, one of the things I noticed, and that was just so shocking, is that you would be driving, like I would be driving from my college going somewhere, and it would be in the evening, and I could literally see into people's houses, because here, first we have a wall and a gate, and then we also have shears. Like you open the curtains, you never open the shears, right? Yeah. But in America, it's like no walls, like the difference between the street and the person's house, like unless you're like living in one of these very expensive places, but most people, it's like the continuum between street and house is right there. And so I realized that this wall business, the hedges, is a very like British thing. So you have a lot of patterns that have nothing to do with what we used to do here, and then thinking about things like a lot of our literature. There's a lot of work that has gone out of print that is no longer available to us, that is beautifully preserved at the School of Oriental and African Studies, for example, or is in the British Museum. Truly, home in terms of history is the UK, but it's also a place that you can't access. You can't just wake up in the morning and be like, I'm just gonna go visit the UK. There's the visa and the whatnot. So I do, as much as Kenya has become a place I can say is home, I still feel there's all these tendrils of me that are everywhere. Yeah.
I love that. Tendrils of me that are everywhere.
Yeah.
Just on a light note, I hope the Macondo Festival will continue with the tradition of taking Yvette's pictures, even though she hasn't attended other panels. But I think I have two final questions, one for each of you. And Makena, with the amazing work that you do with the workshops and the academy, I mean, I've been hearing incredible things. I hope I'm not too old. Can I sign up? Yes. Great, thank you. I mean, do you feel the burden as a female author to inspire a lineage of young female African authors? Do you feel that burden, which I think is unfair, but is it there nevertheless?
No, not at all.
Short and sweet, no, I love it.
I tend not to feel or take on our burdens that are not mine. But I definitely am someone who's very interested in the craft of writing. And it is, okay, let me put it this way. I feel that my American education is a great privilege. There is a way in which I really enjoyed my classes in the US, especially at Amherst College. There was so much emphasis on critical thinking and analysis and all that stuff that I want to share that because I know that very few people have that kind of access or are going to get that kind of access. And that was the genesis of me wanting to start the academy, which started out as the Nairobi Fiction Writing Workshop, and then we expanded it into the Nairobi Writing Academy. It's been on hiatus for a while. Now it's because the idea before was that I would invite writers of all different genres to come in and teach or give their expertise. But then around COVID and towards the end of COVID, it became not so feasible for me to support myself off of that. So I had to go back and work as a market researcher. Yeah, nice. Oh God, it's so painful. But, I decided that going back to work was part of just accepting that I'm a grown up with responsibilities and all that. So fine. So now I do teach a class. So I'm teaching a class right now, but it's a very gentle class in the sense that, we have 9 sessions, but they take place over 17 weeks. So it's very gentle. We give ourselves time to read and all that. And my plan is to be teaching at least one class every 2 classes every year. the cool thing is that other people have come in and sort of taken on the task. So we have Lolwe, which has classes. So a lot of times I send people their way. If, someone will ask me about poetry and I'm like, oh, friend. Then I'm like, Lolwe is doing this, or
Yeah.
they'll come and be like about cinema or something. So there's so many classes. I like that because I think that, yes, you can teach yourself how to write. But for me, the most important thing is understanding or being aware of all the things that you don't know, because otherwise you can't teach yourself if you don't know that you don't know, right? So those introductory classes, I think, do that for a lot of writers. And it's also an opportunity for me to study the craft much more deeply, because, I have to teach it. I have to go back and study it. So it's just a passion, and also makes sense financially, and it gives me a chance to do something that's of interest to me.
Any writing we should look out for?
Or in terms of?
Are you about to publish any book?
Oh no, for me,
Yes.
my own book.
Yes.
For those who've been following my writing, you've noticed that I've published a couple of short stories. I think I've published about 13 now. And some of those revolve around some characters who are the same characters. So what I'm working on is a novel in short stories. It has 23 stories and I have 12 written. But that shouldn't give you guys hope, because those 12 have been written over 5 years. So.
We're still going to be hopeful. We're still going to be hopeful.
Yeah. The work takes as long as it takes.
It takes so long. Yeah.
Thank you. Yvvette, as we close, 2 questions for you. One, writing an imperfect character, especially when she's female, often I've heard that, female authors, and I don't know if it's true, struggle with writing imperfect female characters, especially in the African context. I'm not sure if that's the case, How is that for you when you're exploring imperfect characters, especially,
Yeah, I love it. I want all my female characters to be imperfect. I don't subscribe to stereotypes of what women are supposed to be like. I love Greta Thunberg. I love that she doesn't feel the necessity to wear a dress and smile when she's like delivering her speeches, and I think that's part of the kind of antipathy towards her, that she doesn't conform to what nice girls are supposed to look like, and they're certainly not supposed to come out angry and unsmiling and tell you the facts. It's just not for some people it's like overstepping their place. But I think that very generally human beings are imperfect. I don't think I've ever met a perfect person, and people made up of different characteristics, and they may be perfect in some aspects of their lives, like the guy, I can't remember his name, who locked his daughter in the basement Fritz. Yeah, I watched a documentary about him, and his best friend, who he used to go on holiday with both his family and his friend's family. I used to go away like every single year to this particular place. There was all this footage of them like on these holidays, and they looked like regular people. He looked like a regular person. The guys are laughing. His friend, even after his conviction, was saying that like, I just can't tie together like this, that like the truth of this thing that he did to his daughter, and the best friend, that like the man who was my best friend for, so I think that people have different faces that they present in different circumstances, and you can be you know, a really excellent co-worker while being a disgraceful husband, you know, or you can be like you know, a really patient teacher while being cross with, you know, the demands of your parents, like triggered by them, you know, like regularly. And so I'm interested in that kind of that's what I'm interested in, that complexity in individuals, and particularly in women, because I think that for, like, you know, historically a lot of there aren't that many women who have been writing about women, like all the way through history. Often the images that we have of women have come through male writers, through the male gaze, and they're basically like really flat. They're like one-dimensional, and you know, it's about their looks, or you know, maybe they're really kind, or they're harpies. You know, there's not much like in the middle, and actually I suspect that most women are in the middle there. Somewhere, and so yeah, I love unreliable female characters. I absolutely love it when I am reading a book and I feel like I can't trust her. So I'm having to really work to see between the gaps, read the spaces and the gaps between what she says, or she says something, but you kind of suspect that actually maybe the truth is something else. I actually enjoy that. Yeah, I like to think that you know, I hope that readers won't find my women uninteresting, you know, because a lot of work goes into them, and yeah, I try and make them as authentic as possible, and definitely not perfect. Yeah, never.
Thank you. And that was beautiful. You know, here's to diverse characters. Anything we should look out for? Any new books?
So I've just finished a novel that I've been working on for about 18 months now, and when I say finished, I mean finished. So I finished the first draft, and it went out to I have a group of not a group, they're not all sitting there waiting for me, but I have like friends who will do like some first reading for me and like feedback on like where they particularly, that's what I want, where they think that there are holes, or like it's a bit confused or whatever. So I'm doing like an edit to iron some of those little and not so little things out, and I'm hoping to be I'm not going to estimate, because I keep saying yeah I'll be finished by the end of the month, I'll be finished by the end of next month, and then I'm still like in it, what's going on? But I'm hoping that it'll be finished sometime soon, and that it'll be off on its way into the world. And it's a sprawling family saga, and it's about really it's about the matriarch of that family, who and it's about her relationships with like her children, her husband, her grandchildren, yeah, she's definitely not perfect. She's definitely not.
I love to hear that. Makena, you know, I'm still reeling from the fact that it was about ghosts and not. I was so convinced the family had a mental. You know, I was like, are we going to unpack mental?
Just regular ghosts.
I love it. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, I'd love for you to give a beautiful round of applause for these wonderful authors.
Thank you very much.
Makena Onjerika from Kenya, Yvvette Edwards from the United Kingdom, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I absolutely love this. Makena, I hope this is a gentle ease into your day. Thank you very much. I hope you're staying for the entire day. There's so much to see, so much to hear. I hope you're going to purchase 1 or 2 books at the back. I recommend, my favorite from Yvvette is the mother. And I love Makena's short stories. Prestige Plaza is, Prestige Bookshop is exclusively selling books by all the authors at the event. So try and get a book or two. Thank you very much. My name is Natasha Kimani. It was my absolute pleasure and honor to be your moderator for the day. Thank you very much.
Natasha.
Have a lovely day, everybody.